Hey everybody, this is proposal lecture number 2, and in it I'm going to talk about the contents of a proposal, the different sections, some of which are required, some of which are optional. The thing to keep in mind is that every single person's project in this class is going to be different. And so part of your job as a writer is to decide whether certain sections are necessary for your proposal or not, if it brings much to the party, or if it could be left out for the sake of clarity. I will make note of sections that are required as I go through. Okay, you'll recall in the reading for week 2, the Johnson-Sheehan online text, there was this graphic. I also referenced it in the previous proposal lecture. And it's just basically an indication of the approximate size or weight of a given section. You'll notice that all proposals are going to need to have an introduction. They're all going to need to have a current situation or posed problem. They all have to have a project plan or solution, what you're going to do, qualifications, and then conclusions with a cost-benefit analysis. You'll note too that the biggest portion of a proposal is the project plan. That is your plans for what you will do this semester. You're going to map out how you're going to spend your time. And that's the weightiest of all of them. So let's talk about introductions to get started. Well, because they're at the beginning. So introductions, like their name implies, start things. It's an opening statement. Now, there's a couple different ways of doing introductions. The first thing that you need to know is that, like all technical writing, these need to be clear, concise, and coherent. All right? I'm not looking for something like an English essay. English essays are great, but not for this class and not for senior design. Okay? If you find yourself starting your introduction with something like "in today's society" or something like that, you're off track. Instead, what you need to do in the introduction is say, this document, this proposal is going to do the following things. And remember that your stance is that you are proposing something. You're not informing, you are proposing. You're asking for permission to continue. So you've got to make sure your rhetorical stance is correct. I'm looking for like 3 to 5 sentences. It does not have to be long. And then you can also introduce the scope of the project itself. But a lot of times, people will have something like a purpose statement. Now, a purpose statement is something that often is required in senior design, and that gives you an overview of the project, the whole semester project that you're doing, not necessarily an overview of the document you're trying to write. So they actually work together to have an introduction that talks about this proposal is going to do these things, and then the purpose statement is this project over the course of the semester will do these things. Okay, they're 2 separate things. You can combine them into one. That's okay, or you can leave them separate. Okay, a section that you might find helpful is background information. Not everyone's going to need this, it just kind of depends. Sometimes a background statement offers information that led up to the project. If there's relevant information about a particular product that you're going to use and why you're using it. If you are working for a particular company and you're an employee and you need to let your reader know that, this would be a place to do it. You could also mention that you're a student. You could mention who is in your group, because remember, here at the beginning of the semester, you're submitting things individually and not as a group. So the background would say, hey, I'm in a group with so-and-so, and so, we're both talking about the same things. Those are just sort of background pieces of information. They're not really related directly to the project, per se. They just give more context for your reader. Okay, the section objectives or outcomes is a necessary section for everyone. Okay, a set of objectives is a list of the things you want to achieve in the project. Okay, they are measurable, observable, attainable, and specific tasks. Okay? And it says that right there at the bullet point. You have to think about the time and tasks it's going to take to get from point A to point B. Right, here we are in week 2-ish. And what are you going to submit week 15 or 16, right? The tasks that go with that. It's going to be a list that uses concrete verbs. So it might say design prototype, test prototype, calculate errors, those sorts of things, okay? If you start to write things about the attributes of the product you're making itself, that's different. Those are specifications. Objectives are the tasks you're going to do. specifications I'll talk about more in a minute. Generally, it's a bulleted list with a single task per bullet. It's one of those times where lists are actually preferable to paragraphs, and I'll do my best to explain at various times why bulleted lists are not appropriate, but in this case, this is what you want to do. Okay, so the current situation. Remember, with an unsolicited proposal, you have, well, let's start with a solicited proposal. A customer, a business comes to you and says, here's our problem, help us solve it, right? You automatically have a problem, and then your job is to simply respond to that. If you are coming up with your own project, which is going to be more of you than not, you have essentially an unsolicited proposal, and that means that the first item of business in your proposal is to show that there's actually a need, show that the current situation is not meeting the needs of employees, or that there's actually a missing link somewhere along the way with a particular service, or that you've created some widget that is actually going to be better than something on the market. Okay, so your job is to define the problem or the current situation, explaining the cause and effects. If we don't change it, these are what will happen, or by creating this new widget, we will have a marketable item that can do X, Y, and Z. Okay. It's sometimes it's called statement of need or problem statement. I like current situation a little bit better because it's not always a problem that you're solving. Sometimes it's taking an existing system and simply updating it. And it's the old system is just a little outdated, and it just, you're losing money, but it's not like problem, like the world's going to end. You get the idea. You can use any of those headings that you want, current situation statement and your problem statement. Those are all fine. Okay, so a little bit more detail about the current situation. Define what it is. What exactly is the problem you are trying to solve? What is the need that is there? What is the current protocol that's in place that doesn't meet the needs of the people using it? You're going to write this in paragraph form. It's big picture. You're not going to necessarily get into too much detail because really the project plan for solution is the much bigger issue. You just have to prove there's actually a need. So you could also talk about when the problem began, how big is it, who is affected by it, are there aspects of the problem that your project is not going to address? That's a key one. Sometimes you have ideas that are much bigger than what you can get done in a 16-week semester. And so defining the parameters of the problem you're going to address can be really key to keeping the scope of your project manageable. The other thing you need to make sure of, because you're trying to prove that there's actually a need, is you have to offer evidence of some kind. Are there statistics or diagrams or illustrations that are going to help make your point? Is there a way to show how the current situation is unsatisfactory? Avoid jargon in this part and keep wording simple. Again, remember, concise, coherent, and clear are the things that you're trying to achieve. So don't confuse, okay, so there's a couple issues. Don't confuse a problem with a lack of a product. This gardening company lacks a four-wheel cart. Therefore, the problem is there is no four-wheel cart, and we must solve it by buying a four-wheel cart. That's not quite it. Instead, the problem would be something like we're moving heavy objects for a distance of more than 100 meters at a time, and it's starting to really wear on the bodies of our employees. That's the problem, and it could be solved by buying this four-wheel cart. You get the idea. Don't assume that your reader agrees that there is a problem. Okay, there's elements of persuasion here. This is the basic of rhetoric. You are persuading, you're asking, you're inviting them to understand something. If you think it's obvious and you're mentally rolling your eyes at having to write this document, let's face it, most of you are, that's going to come across in your writing. Instead, look at this with some sort of sincerity, that you really want this person to understand what it is that you're trying to resolve. So you've got to show the problem, so to speak, and not just say it, right? Like you could just say, there's a problem, we're going to fix it. And that sounds kind of patronizing. This section is maybe 2 paragraphs usually. Sometimes it goes a little longer, but it's not like super massive. Okay, so the project plan. Remember that this is the largest section of any proposal. And it's going to include the overall solution, any major and minor steps, the deliverable, the artifact, the document you're creating, the system, the circuit design, whatever it is that you're going to deliver at the end of it. It's going to talk about that in its various attributes. So overall solution might be an introductory paragraph where you just say, in order to solve the issue just that I've outlined previously, I'm going to build X, Y, and Z. Okay, it's simple terms. It's sort of an overview of your rationale, if you will, and it specifically points back to the need and how it addresses those needs. So the next part is how you're going to get the work done. You need to list out what the major and minor steps are. It's a systematic plan. It discusses methods, procedures, timetables, and benchmarks. You might find that subheadings are really helpful. Things like your objectives might get revamped in this section and described in more detail. Things like a Gantt chart are going to come in handy in this part. Gantt charts are, of course, visual representations of a project's schedule, the tasks and time. So where you had objectives, which are tasks, you could put those over into your Gantt chart and then just give dates across the top of when you're going to have those things done. That's a Gantt chart. Sometimes Gantt charts are pretty clunky and you actually have separate files that all they are is a Gantt chart. It's one great big, Microsoft, I forget which program it is, file. You don't have to try and copy and paste that into a document. You could just revise it so that it is a smaller table format and make it a little bit more simplified. Again, remember that the purpose of my class is to communicate more effectively with people who are outside of your chosen field of engineering. So think about that in terms of how you represent time and tasks together. And required for all of you is some indication of time and tasks. So however you choose to do it, whether it be a Gantt chart or something simplified. So the deliverable is the thing that you're going to produce, whether it's a service, an actual widget that you're building, or if you're doing secondary research, you're going to provide simply a large report on a topic. Okay? The device or apparatus, your white paper at the end of the term will be documentation of the thing. Okay? If you're doing secondary research, the white paper itself is the thing. And so your white paper is something drastically different than the others. Not drastically, quite different. Okay, so one is describing a widget, the other one is describing what other people have to say on the topic. Okay, target specifications. I mentioned that I would talk about this earlier. Remember, objectives are tasks. Build prototype, test prototype, those sorts of things. Target specifications are the physical attributes, the materials, the dimensions, the qualities, the abilities of whatever it is you are creating. Okay? For those doing secondary research, you're doing descriptions about the end product. So you're going to say that you're going to reference so many outside sources in industry and so many academic ones, that the paper itself will be approximately this long. For the other for target specifications for primary research, you're looking at the physical attributes if it's an actual widget, or the design attributes if it's circuitry or information systems, that kind of thing. So materials that are going to be used, pieces per hour, man hours needed, other efficiency details, illustrations, sketches, those are the sorts of things to include. Okay, qualifications are basically a section that just says what you bring to the table. How are you qualified to do this project? You could do a brief biographical statement and supply this just fine. You can also give a few more details about the company or that you work for them, that kind of thing, if you think that that's relevant. Conclusion can include cost-benefit, and it's a good idea for those of you in senior design to do cost-benefit, and this is where it would go. It should not restate the thesis and main points like an English essay. Instead, you're saying, with permission, I will pursue this project, and you go forth from here. All right, after this, there's one more proposal lecture. Consult your course calendar for details